Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And we actually hadn't been planning on doing an episode this week, which is why this is a bit late. But we were relaxing on the weekend, having a celebratory picnic with friend of the pod, Shy Charles, when we got a BBC push notification.
That Meghan Markle had given the final push to... Sorry, that's so gross.
The ultimate push notification.
Yeah, the push notification. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have welcomed their second child, a daughter. Congratulations to all of them.
Yeah, the baby was born on Friday and then this announcement came on Sunday. So a lot of people are very impressed by how there were no leaks. No one knew about this for 2 days. And it is really nice that they got to spend 2 days of not being hassled.
Yeah, and she had the baby in a hospital in Santa Barbara. It wasn't like it was a home birth or anything. So it was particularly impressive that they managed to keep that under wraps for so long.
Yeah.
Also maybe suggests to me that they didn't let anyone in the royal family know until they let everyone else know. But let's talk about the name first.
Yes, so the push notification also told us that they had named the child Lilibet Lily Diana Mountbatten Windsor.
Yeah, and in case there was any doubt about the name's origin, the Sussexes said in a statement, Lily is named after her great-grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen, whose family nickname is Lilibet. Her middle name, Diana, was chosen to honour her beloved late grandmother, the Princess of Wales. So I think we've talked about the Lilibet nickname on the podcast before, but in case you don't know, it was a nickname that was coined when the Queen, or then Princess Elizabeth, was a toddler and she couldn't pronounce her own name, so she called herself Lilibet, and her grandfather, King George V, started calling her that, sort of imitating her own attempts to say her name, and it eventually stuck and her family called her that, and then later Prince Philip called her Lilibet as well.
Well, according to the Crown, Prince Philip also called her Cabbage, but they decided not to go with that, I guess.
A couple of other things that stood out to me were that Meghan's wedding flower was Lily of the Valley. So there's that connection. And also Meghan wrote on the Tig once that her mother, Doria Ragland, used to call her a flower as a pet name. So Meghan choosing a kind of floral name for her own daughter calls back to that a little bit. And also, possibly worth pointing out that Princess Charlotte, the daughter of Kate and Will, her full name is Charlotte Elizabeth Diana Mountbatten Windsor, so there's a little bit of overlap there.
Interesting. There were a few press reports on Monday that Harry and Meghan had called the Queen and told her that they would be calling the child Lilibet before she was born. But we don't know whether they were asking her permission or just letting her know.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine it would be pretty awkward to say, oh, we're going to call her Lilibet, and the Queen be like, absolutely not. And then they'd be like, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a matter of asking.
The Queen's consent.
And, it is a very traditional thing for people to do, to name children after older members of their family. So, in a way, it's not very surprising as a custom, but these particular names came as Lilibet came as a total shock to me.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that. And the fact that it was a double whammy of family names, I mean, I guess, again, it's normal for the royal family. They love layering in these family names even more than usual families in the UK. But Lilibet Diana was a real surprise to me.
I think it was surprising to me because Lilibet is probably the most royal name you could possibly choose for this child. And Archie was the least royal name they could have chosen for their first child, which was also a shock. If you kind of think about them in contrast, Archie Harrison using a nickname as a first name, such an untraditional, un-British name, seemed to indicate that this was Harry and Meghan doing things their own way. So I'm wondering, what does this name tell us about Harry and Meghan? And I thought there were kind of a few ways you could read it, as we discussed at this event with Shy Charles on Sunday. One, which is sort of the main reading, is that it's an affectionate nod to the Queen. Mm-hmm. Two, it's a kind of reminder for Lily as she grows up about her royal heritage, which she'll probably feel quite detached from since she's presumably going to remain living in America? Or 3, is it a kind of fuck you to the royals and a sign that Harry and Meghan will not go quietly into this non-royal life, and a sort of reminder that their daughter is still a royal even if the royals won't give her security or a title?
Yeah, and I like to think it's number 3 because I do love the drama of them saying fuck you to the rest of the royal family, but I think it's a weird way to say fuck you by forever tying yourself into the family even further with these royal names. I really liked it when they went with Archie, and I felt like, wow, this is so fresh and modern, and they're moving away from the kind of dusty old names of the past, and now they seem to be moving in the opposite direction. But I guess they do live in an in-between space.
You're right, Tom, and I can understand, you know, how toxic that environment must feel, having that much tension and being so far apart, and maybe they did want to extend this kind of olive branch, but I do think these are 2 quite heavy names to saddle a small child with, especially one that you would like to lead a relatively private life. I feel like it guarantees a lot of interest in this child for the rest of their life, although you might say people are always going to be interested in this child anyway.
Yeah, but I think you're right that it will focus attention and be very hard to get away from. These are 2 names, 2 women who've had massive impact, huge legacies, very different kinds of legacies, but, you know, both world famous forever.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's very Meghan in the sense that now both her children have nicknames as first names, but I just wish it wasn't the Queen's nickname.
Yeah, I mean, that was my main problem with it, is that I don't like the Queen, and so I'm always going to feel a bit weird about someone naming their child after her.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very popular with our listeners. I think
yeah.
a lot of people really loved it. Harry and Meghan wrote on the Archewell website, on June 4, we were blessed with the arrival of our daughter, Lily. She is more than we could have ever imagined, and we remain grateful for the love and prayers we felt from across the globe. Thank you for your continued kindness and support during this very special time for our family. It's a very sweet message. And they were asking people to donate or read up more about various charities instead of sending gifts or whatever. So
yeah,
again, that's a very Harry and Meghan thing to do.
They know their fans now and they can anticipate the kind of response, and it is good to see them kind of shaping that. It's similar to what we saw from them with the vaccine advocacy, that they kind of are learning how to hopefully really effectively harness that kind of power.
Just a bit of trivia. Lilibet is the most senior royal in the current line of succession to have been born overseas, and she would be eligible to become president of the United States someday if she wishes. Let's talk a little bit about the reaction from the royal family though, because I was intrigued by this. I think what was most striking to me was that the palace statement came 90 minutes after the news was announced, which would suggest a lack of coordination between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. But the royal family social media accounts all posted messages at the same time then a few hours later, and they all liked each other's posts as well, which suggested a very coordinated in-house strategy to me.
Some very busy social media assistants, or maybe just one person with all the accounts on their phone.
Yeah, because I think the Cambridge's one on Twitter said it was sent from an iPhone or something, which I thought was funny. Like Sunday afternoon, somebody was having to quickly put a tweet out. But okay, let's go from the top.
So Buckingham Palace posted on socials with an image from Harry and Meghan's wedding, and they said, "Congratulations to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex on the birth of Lilibet Diana. The Queen, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall and the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are delighted with the news."
Then Clarence House put out a picture of Harry and Meghan and Archie from the South Africa tour with the message, "Congratulations to Harry, Meghan and Archie on the arrival of baby Lilibet Diana," with sort of streamer emoji, "wishing them all well at this time. Full stop."
Full stop. Interesting. Kensington Palace released a statement with a black and white picture of Harry, Meghan and Archie, the one that they released on Mother's Day. And it's the same one that we posted as well. They said, We are all delighted by the happy news of the arrival of baby Lily. Congratulations to Harry, Meghan and Archie.
I felt like the Cambridge's one was the sort of warmest one, and it had that nice picture. I felt like Charles's one was
Stiff.
the least warm.
Yeah. Little chilly.
That surprised me, and I'm really intrigued about whether Charles is going to go to California to see this baby.
I, in some ways, really doubt it. I just can't imagine him leaving the country for anything that isn't like a royal tour or trip to meet a Saudi prince or something like that, you know?
Well, I think he should.
Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, this is a family of, like, people who are very weird about showing affection, so it's difficult to predict. But surely they would understand the PR opportunities of going to see Harry, Meghan and Archie and Lily.
Yeah. It was really depressing to me looking at the social media posts, especially the Instagram posts, all the replies. If I could go the rest of my life without seeing an Instagram comment that says, classy, you're the definition of class.
Yeah.
I'd be happy.
But up until this push notification, the royal story that we were most excited about was one that came from The Guardian as part of their ongoing investigation into the Queen's consent procedure and the royal household. It was a piece titled "Buckingham Palace Banned Ethnic Minorities from Office Roles, Papers Reveal." It details how documents that they found in the National Archives show that the Queen's courtiers banned, quote, coloured immigrants or foreigners from serving in clerical roles in the royal household until at least the late 1960s, although they were allowed to be in domestic service roles.
And, like, this sounds bad, but it just gets so much worse.
Yeah.
Like, the headline is bad enough, but when you read the piece, like, it's not clear when these discriminatory hiring practices ended, because Buckingham Palace refused to answer questions about the ban and when it was revoked. So the palace said its records showed people from ethnic minority backgrounds being employed in the 1990s, and added that before that decade it didn't keep records on the racial backgrounds of employees, which is very convenient.
And also, that would imply to me that they had a lot of white staff. But we've seen a lot of people leaping to the palace's defence this week, saying things like, well, back in the 60s, this wasn't unusual. Except that it was in the 60s that government ministers were looking to introduce laws that would make it illegal to refuse to employ an individual on the grounds of their race or ethnicity. And on top of that, these documents shed light on how Buckingham Palace negotiated controversial clauses exempting the Queen and her household from the laws that prevented race and sex discrimination. These were the ones that were finally brought in the 70s, but it had started in the 60s.
This is the most shocking part to me.
Yeah.
And this comes back to the Queen's consent process, which we've talked about before, but it's the old tradition, whereby the Queen has to give permission for any bill that might affect her to be debated in Parliament. We talked about it on an episode called The Embarrassment of Riches a few weeks ago, if you're interested in hearing any more about it. That was mainly to do with the Queen negotiating an exemption from transparency laws to do with financial dealings.
But
another great look for the royal family.
But these exemptions remain in place to this day. So, you know, these fucking people who are saying, oh, it was all in the past. Like, no, it's still a problem right now. And in a statement, Buckingham Palace did not dispute that the Queen had been exempted from the laws. And they added that it had a separate process for hearing complaints related to discrimination. But they did not respond when asked what this process consists of.
But then after The Guardian's report was published, the palace put out another statement basically dismissing the story. And it said, claims based on a second-hand account of conversations from over 50 years ago should not be used to draw or infer conclusions about modern-day events or operations. The principles of Crown application and Crown consent are long established and widely known. Definitely not widely known.
Jesus.
Fuck off. Do you know anybody that could tell you anything about Crown application or Crown consent?
No, I couldn't tell you what it is.
But also this stood out to me as yet another notable example of the royals contradicting their own mantra to never complain, never explain.
Yeah. And, once again, trying to make excuses for their own bad behaviour. It really reminded me, this stuff about, the statement that they issued after the piece, it reminded me of the stuff we were talking about with the Queen not letting the police in to check if there are any looted statues. It's like, well, they shouldn't have to come in because there aren't any. It's like, well, we actually don't need to be part of the law about discrimination because we've got our own practices in place to stop discrimination. It's like, well, then why can't you just have the law ones then?
And the thing about this is it came so soon after Will shoving his fucking foot in his mouth and saying we're very much not a racist family.
Yeah, and them saying that they would deal with that internally.
I know. Now we know what it looks like when they deal with things internally. And it's just humiliating because this is all following on from Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah and the comments that Meghan made about Archie's skin tone, and now they've just had another child. And again, we're seeing this sort of stilted response from the palace to the birth of the child. And it's frustrating because I don't know how the royals think they should respond to this. Clearly, they believe it's better to complain and dismiss it and say, oh, there's nothing to see here, rather than own up to it and say, we have made mistakes and we've learned from it and this is what we're doing now. Hiring a diversity czar or whatever.
I haven't heard anything else about that though since that intention.
I think it's unfortunate that this got pretty much buried last week by the announcement of the plans for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee next year, which is going to mean a 4-day bank holiday in the UK. Obviously, that is a much more relevant news story for the average news reader than this stuff about Queen's consent. So it makes sense that publications would lead with that. But it just meant there was no more pressure on the royal family to respond to this beyond their paltry little statement they made.
And it is a real pattern that they're able to wave these things off with the smallest amount of effort. And it should be making us all incredibly angry forever, but especially now, I think.
I want to talk about a big story that was in the Sunday Times yesterday. The splash, very intriguing splash. Palace sends for Prince William to rescue Union. You guys know we love any stories about the royals and the Scottish independence referendum.
Yeah.
So we were all over this one. Basically, it's that courtiers are drawing up plans for Prince William and Kate Middleton to spend more time in Scotland to bolster the union amid fears in the royal household that politicians are, quote, losing Scotland.
So the palace aides want Will and Kate to build on the success of their recent visit to Scotland, and that's their words, by making them into a visible symbol of the bond between the two countries.
And it did make me wonder, in whose eyes was this tour a success? Because we talked on the last episode about the sort of muted coverage of the tour and the rather messy ending to it with that secret, not so secret, put it in the court circular meeting with Gordon Brown. But also the Scottish media were very cold on the tour. The National, the newspaper, Scottish newspaper, described the royal family as treating Scotland like its own personal tartan Disneyland.
And I feel like it's a very, English view of this tour to describe it as a success. Because I think looking from here, we got all the images of them smiling and meeting people and then with kids. And we said on our episode that I said that I did think it went quite well until that end bit. But I don't think it was received in the same way in Scotland. And so if the palace think it was a success, it just really reinforces the fact that they are not looking from any other angles or anybody else's point of view at this.
I do think that meeting at the end was a sticking point, though. The Times had a quote from the SNP politician, MP John Nicholson. We know that the royal family has been used in the past to counter independence. I think it would be a big mistake for the young royals to get involved. If they really want to understand what is happening in Scotland, they should be talking to young people and not to Gordon Brown, who's a representative of a very different era. And he's referring there to what we've talked about in the podcast many times, the Queen making that comment during the first independence referendum, which was seen as her warning people to think very carefully about the future and vote no on independence, basically.
But that was, billed as an aside that the Queen made that just so happened to make it into the papers. Whereas this is full frontal, very obvious Will is here to save the Union. It's like a very different tact. The Times also reported that former First Minister Alex Salmond had accused Will of poor judgment by meeting with Gordon Brown and questioned what on earth Prince William thought he was doing. And it makes a lot of sense. What on earth does he think he's doing?
Luckily, we've got a royal source to shed some light on that, Tom. Apparently, officials do not think the independence issue should be left to politicians because the Union is based on a united monarchy as well as a political deal. The source said, they think of it as their union. It was originally a union of crowns. They think the politicians have been losing Scotland for them. What William is doing is a deliberately more muscular approach to the crown investing in the relationship with Scotland.
Like his muscular vaccine selfie.
That muscular arm is muscling its way into Scotland.
Yeah, wrapping his muscular arms around the throat of Scottish people. That is a striking insight into what they think of Scotland, and basically that, I guess this is no surprise, but they think of it as theirs.
Yeah.
They actually think of it as theirs. I mean, obviously they do, they're royals, but it's quite shocking.
They're coming out and saying it, basically, not in so many words, but also I think it's fascinating to be positioning Will like this as the face of the royal intervention in Scottish politics and having him almost explicitly stating an opinion on a referendum like this. Because I do think this leak is coming directly from the palace.
Yeah.
And under these proposals, the Cambridges would spend far more time at Balmoral, which is the Queen's estate in Scotland, treating it as a regular home rather than a place for brief holidays. I want to know how they're supposed to do that. They've got 2 kids in school in London.
Just pack them off to Gordonston. That's what I say.
So that's what I'm wondering. Are they going to send these kids to boarding school? Is it possible that they are going to enroll the kids in a school in Scotland?
I mean, it's possible, but it would be a real change. Like, the kids are presumably pretty well settled in St Thomas's, Battersea. How could they rip them away from their little friends?
Yeah, and it would be 1000% weaponizing your kids as a political tool.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if people would feel that warm about that.
Well, Will is rapidly showing himself to be a real political tool.
They would also reportedly strengthen their ties with St Andrews, the town where Kate and Will met when they were in college. The royal source said, advisors want William and Kate to be in Balmoral a lot more and build on their St Andrews connection. They want them not to look like visitors, but to look like residents, which the Sunday Times kindly explains is likely to mean that William is not seen wearing a kilt.
The source also said that the feeling is that successive governments have let this drift and that the politicians are irreparably divided. And what we need is one king to rule them all, to bring the nation together. Like in the good old days. Will sees himself as King Arthur. And that is hilarious, but also terrible.
This kind of leak, though, like I'm saying, I think it is the palace testing the waters and seeing what the reaction would be like to Kate and Will actually making such a move.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because Harry and Meghan's baby news coming out on the same day kind of steamrolled this story, so it's not really clear to me how British people would feel about this. I would have to imagine they wouldn't be all that crazy about the idea.
Yeah, I mean, all that really matters is how Scottish people feel about this. Like, I don't care what people in England think of this, but like, oh yes, must keep the union together. Like,
I do think, though, if it could affect people's views of the royals as politically neutral, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I guess people just don't mind when the royals do political stuff that they also agree with, and I imagine a lot of conservative people in England would not see this as a bad thing.
I do think it's very intriguing to be pinning this on Will now. Like, is it his responsibility to stop Scotland gaining independence? Like, if the referendum passes, is he going to be the one blamed for losing Scotland or losing the union? And like, if it doesn't, does that mean he's going to take all the credit for it? Like,
he's going to take the credit for it. But we should move on to our quote of the week, which comes from an interview in The Telegraph by Camilla Tominey. She was talking to none other than Sophie Wessex and Prince Edward.
This piece really starts off by like making it seem like they've got this really cozy home with their dogs, even though they live in like one of the biggest royal homes of the whole royal family. But they joke about not having seen Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah. And Camilla Tominey asks them if they've watched it. They look at each other as if to dare the other to speak first. Oprah who? Smiles the Earl, feigning ignorance. Yes, what interview? Chuckles his wife. I can just tell these two are absolutely intolerable.
Yeah, already. But like, it's one thing trying to joke your way out of an awkward question, but it's another thing entirely to come out with what we've chosen as our quote of the week, which is when Camilla Tominey points out that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, apparently had a long conversation with Oprah at Harry and Meghan's wedding without knowing who she was. And Sophie pipes up saying, you know, if you're not into chat shows, there's no reason why you should know who she is. Certainly not in this country, anyway. The cheek of this coming from Sophie Wessex? Nobody in this country knows who Sophie Wessex is!
That is incredibly true. I would point out that she was trying to defend the Archbishop of Canterbury for not knowing who Oprah was.
A man of God.
So I guess maybe she thought that was her duty as with the Church of England or something. I don't fucking know. She sounds like an absolute idiot, though.
This is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen anybody say.
It is so funny to me. As well, the royal reporter and biographer Omid Scobie tweeted about this and included 2 photos of Sophie visiting the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in Johannesburg in 2013, which was very nicely done, I have to say. There were a couple of other moments that I thought were really funny in this interview, because I guess it was billed as, here are the new stars to replace Harry and Meghan. And she asks them how they feel about getting more prominence. And Edward says, well, we're flattered is probably the best way of putting it. And then Sophie admits, inevitably the spotlight and the focus falls on younger members as time goes on. We've plodded along doing what we're doing, hopefully doing it well. And then all of a sudden there's a bit of a hiatus and things have changed a bit. Naturally, the media are looking for people to fill the so-called void. But, you know, we've been doing this for what feels like a pretty long time. If you want to pay more attention to what we're doing, then great, because actually it's got to be good for our organisations and the work that we are trying to carry out. If people want to pay more attention to what we're doing, then here we are doing an interview with The Telegraph in our home.
It was such a fawning interview as well. I mean, as you'd expect, but Camilla Tominey described them as the monarchy's most underappreciated troopers.
I know, and then the Telegraph had a piece about how she's the secret style star or something. It's just, it's a lot.
Yeah. I also really liked that they very kindly said that Edward had stepped down from Ardent, his television production company, rather than running it into the ground.
Yes. Very polite way of putting it. And listen, we don't have a fit for a queen this week because there was nothing going on. And first in line is clearly Meghan.
Yes. Once again, congratulations to Meghan and Harry, and Archie as well will be welcoming his sister. But until next time...
Thank you so much for listening and have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bravo, Lilibet.